I'm your host, Ricardo Martinez. Today, I'm here with Jesse Knutson, who is one of my favorite guests. He's, what's your official title at Bitfinex Securities?
My title is Head of Operations of Bitfinex Securities.
Head of Operations at Bitfinex Securities. Nice. So, Jesse, how are you today?
Very good, very good. Yeah, it was cool seeing you in El Salvador. That was really good. That was a great trip. That was a really interesting trip.
What was the response for Bitfinex Securities in El Salvador? Was there a lot of excitement and anticipation around it?
Yeah, I think definitely. It was really, really busy. I went straight from the airport into meetings with our regulators, and it was nonstop. So we were meeting with people who wanted to do issuances, people from the policy side and government, people from the regulator, people from the certifiers. It was just really, really busy. So I didn't actually get to see anything of El Salvador. You know, I went to the regulators' offices, I went to some government offices, and then I was in the Hilton Hotel. That's my understanding of El Salvador. But it was great. I mean, one of the things I've been telling people is one of the refreshing things about El Salvador is that it just felt like people were so positive about the future and just so excited about what's going on there. And I think that's really refreshing when you compare that with a lot of other places globally that are, you know, not quite so optimistic. So I think it was really refreshing and really exciting. It definitely feels like there's a buzz in the air over there.
Yeah, it certainly does. That's one of the things I've noticed on both my trips there is that there seems to be like an optimism that's like tangible. You can like feel it in the air.
Yeah. No, it was really interesting.
Yeah, it certainly is. So I'm going to get into my first question here. Sure. How would you characterize the evolution of security token offerings so far since 2022? Yeah,
it feels like a lot is going on. So I normally characterize this as kind of three pieces of a puzzle, right? And I think we talked about this last time. So it's, you know, it's technology, it's investable assets, and then it's commercially viable regulatory oversight. And all of those things coming together, I think, are really what's important for the security token industry to achieve its potential. On the technology side, you know, the technology that we use in the digital asset industry is just a step ahead of what's being used in traditional capital markets, right? So all the benefits that we're used to as Bitcoin investors, things like real-time settlement, 24/7, 365 trading, global liquidity, and all of that stuff. And then the stuff that's made possible by, you know, Blockstream's Liquid Network, which is a side chain of Bitcoin that lets you set up these whitelisted ecosystems so users can do things like pull their securities off the platform. They can self-custody them, they can move them around, trade them, even trade them peer-to-peer in Telegram chats or wherever, because there's this whitelisted ecosystem. So the technology is definitely coming along. Investable assets has been another thing that we've been putting together over the last, you know, 12, 24 months. I think that's matured a lot. And then the third thing is, you know, that's been the slowest develop in the STO industry. You know, I've been looking at STOs since 2018. And I think a lot of people over that time have just been kind of like worn out because it's taken so long, but really we move at the space of regulators. And I would say that we've made progress on all of those things. So we've just launched a new asset on the platform, Alt 2611. It's issued by Alternative, which is a Luxembourg-based securitization fund managed by Mikro Kapital, which is a microfinancing company. And it's a 36-month, 10% coupon bond issued by, I think, a really seasoned issuer. So it's a really high quality offering. And I think we've got a really robust pipeline of assets, both in the AIFC and El Salvador, that we're going to start bringing more of these kind of assets to market in the next couple of months. So I think everything is maturing over time. I think El Salvador, as we said, is going to be a huge part of that puzzle and bringing things together for the security token industry. And then on the regulatory side, I think we've developed really positive relationships with our two regulators. So if you remember from last time, we're registered and licensed in both the Astana International Financial Center, which is a financial center like Dubai or Abu Dhabi in Astana, Kazakhstan, and then also in El Salvador. So our regulators there are AFSA and the AIFC, and then SENAD, the National Digital Asset Commission in El Salvador. And we've built up really good relationships with both of those regulators. And I think the way we want to drive the business is very much aligned with them. And they were even gracious enough to join us in Lugano for Plan B. So we did a panel there where we had the CEO of AFSA and the president of the National Digital Asset Commission on a panel to talk about security tokens. So I think, you know, everything is kind of moving along on all three of those fronts. And I think right now it's about kind of incrementally embracing the grind and then bringing more assets to the platform over the next couple of months.
Amazing. I want to bring it back to something you just mentioned. You mentioned how Astana is a financial center similar to Dubai, but after visiting El Salvador, we both know that El Salvador has aspirations to become a financial center similar to Dubai or like Singapore or something like that. How would you, I guess, rate El Salvador's progress in that goal?
Well, they're starting from, in Kazakhstan, I think financial services are like 6% of GDP. And I think it's probably even smaller in El Salvador. So they're starting from a really low base. And that's kind of the appeal of these markets, to be honest. I think, people sometimes wonder, why are we in AIFC? Why are we in El Salvador? Why aren't we registered and licensed in, London, Tokyo, or New York, another financial center, a traditional, more conventional financial center like that? And the reason is that, there's a lot of pushback from the incumbent players in those markets. Financial services are a really big part of GDP. And from policymakers and regulator perspective, there's just less upside and there's more downside. And for El Salvador and for the AIFC, it's all upside for them. So they're really looking to leverage this technology and develop capital markets. And I think it's interesting to watch what's going on in the more mature economies, like the G7, relative to maybe what you can kind of group as like, although Kazakhstan doesn't really fit into this, but kind of the global south, like small and mid-sized economies. And I wonder if we'll see kind of a bit of a divergence in terms of the regulatory path, where the regulators in the G7, they kind of crack down, they protect the incumbents, and then the smaller, more nimble, hungrier economies, they embrace this technology, and I think that's probably where the opportunity lies, is for those kind of economies.
I want to bring it back to Mikro Kapital. This is one of the first, if not the first, type of tokenized offerings like this, correct?
Yeah. I think it depends on how you define a tokenized bond. So from my perspective, there's been a lot of attempts at this, and you see a lot of stuff in the news, but when you start to dig into it, it doesn't look that different than the traditional system. So it's, it's going from left hand to right hand. It's often going through a depository. You can't self-custody it. You can't pull it off the platform. You're limited by trading hours. And this is the first one where it's going to be issued on Liquid. People can pull it off the platform. They can put it in their Jade wallet. They could trade it peer-to-peer once they're on the whitelist. And it's going to trade on Bitfinex Securities. So it trades 24/7, 365. We have real-time settlement. So I think from that perspective of kind of using our definition of what tokenization is, I think it's one of the first globally.
Okay, cool. What's the response been from investors? And then have you seen other like small to medium-sized businesses kind of like hurry to line up to offer a similar offering?
Yeah, we've got a lot of investors looking at it, and I think the reason is that there's a hunger in our industry for kind of low volatility assets that are wrapped up in the security wrapper, right? So the benefits of a tokenized security versus, an ICO or something like that is that you've got a regulator that comes in and sets the rules, they set the guidelines, and then you have clearly defined rights and obligations. So the issuer has to do something, and the investor gets something. So I think that's the big difference. And I've always thought that, as Bitcoin price starts to go up and people just naturally want to take some money off the table, where do you put that? You park it in stable coins. I mean, things like Tether Gold are great places to park money. And I think also these low volatility assets that are, they've got a certain degree of regulatory certainty around them. And then they also provide you with a 10% yield. I think these are a perfect place for people to, maybe put some of their profits when it starts to get hot in the digital asset markets.
I think you're right about that, because things like Tether and Tether Gold will protect you from volatility, but they don't offer a return. And I see that as like a key differentiator here. How would you say that security tokens are increasing financial inclusion globally?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think there definitely is an inclusion story here. I think when you look around the world globally, one of the things that we talk about often in the financial technology space is banking the unbanked, and it's kind of a bit of a cliche, really. But I think it's not really individuals that are unbanked. We also think of it as whole regions and asset classes that are unbanked, and that struggle to get access to global capital markets, whether it's small, medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, or basically most of the global south, where it's just difficult for them to access capital markets. So STOs offer the opportunity for investors, wherever they are, to access these kind of high quality investment opportunities, often low volatility investment opportunities, where in traditional markets, the access isn't as equal. And even when you ignore like friction points like accredited investor rules or foreign investment restrictions, many investors are basically just walled off from participation in things like private equity, fixed income, overseas public equity, or all kinds of different alternative assets. So I think that's something we can do to bring more of these kind of assets to investors. And then on the issuer side, there's obviously just silos of companies and investment opportunities in Central Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, that just aren't very well serviced by traditional investment banks, and that struggle to get access to capital markets. And a big part of that is because their cost structure is so much higher than us, because basically what we try and do is more directly connect the issuer with the investor. So because we do that, we can offer our services at a lower price point, and then can provide those services to more people. So yeah, I think there's definitely an inclusion story there, and our focus very much is on these kind of smaller and mid-sized economies.
Out of these emerging economies in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, which region do you see as like the most active or most important in your opinion?
Yeah, it's really tough to say. I think there's obviously a lot of momentum in Latin America, especially right now after the election in Argentina. I think there's a lot of excitement to see what's going to happen there. And Argentina is not a small country, right? It's an interesting development. There's already a lot of excitement about El Salvador. There's Bitcoin miners in Paraguay and Uruguay. So there's a lot of excitement and a lot of action that's happening in Latin America. Central Asia is one that I think people are less familiar with, but I've been over to Kazakhstan 3 or 4 times in the last 12 months. And I'm constantly blown away by, the quality of the people over there. Like it's a very well-educated population. And the quality of the opportunities there. So we've had, various opportunities to work with government-backed entities, very large companies. We signed an MOU in June with the Astana International Exchange, which is the conventional securities exchange in the AIFC, to do dual listings and to explore tokenization. So companies that have already listed or that want to do an IPO, they can also do an STO at the same time. So they're just very front foot on technology. So I think there's big opportunities there. Africa is one that really interests me because of the demographics, the population, and I think there's a lot of opportunities in Africa as well that I thought I would be quite keen to sniff out. But really, there's just a lot of opportunities everywhere, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Last time you were on the show, you mentioned that one of the goals of Bitfinex Securities is to offer these kinds of services to Bitcoin companies as well, not just traditional companies that are outside of the Bitcoin space. Have you guys made any headway with that?
Yeah, we're talking to a Bitcoin miner in the El Salvador regime about listing an asset. I think about what we talked about last time is, during the last cycle, we saw a lot of our best and brightest, go to the NASDAQ and IPO on the NASDAQ. And I've always felt that was kind of frustrating. So, Coinbase, love them or hate them, they're one of the biggest companies in the space. They've got, a huge number of users. They IPO'd. Basically, all of the miners went and IPO'd on the NASDAQ because the valuations they were getting. And I've always felt that kind of disappointing. So yeah, I would like to see more of our Bitcoin companies, especially the big ones, to go the security token route. And kind of let's eat our own dog food, rather than falling back on the traditional finance methodology.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. As a Bitcoiner, first and foremost, I'd love to see some Bitcoin companies take advantage of this framework as well.
Definitely.
You guys just celebrated your 2nd anniversary not that long ago. What are some of the landmark achievements that really stand out to you?
Yeah, I think so. There's been quite a few. I think maybe over the last 12 months, maybe over the last 12 months, the first big one of the year would be opening the office in the AIFC. That was a big one because, as I don't know if people know this, but Bitfinex just in general is a very decentralized company. We don't have that many offices. So it's a big deal to open up a physical office in the AIFC and then assigning dedicated headcount to work there with the regulator and then to focus on various opportunities across Central Asia. Another big one I think was that kind of followed through from that was our MOU with the AIX that I mentioned. I think that was, it's just really great to have that kind of opportunity to explore security tokenization and dual listings. I think for them to do that was pretty forward looking and very front foot to them to embrace the technology to that degree. Also, the establishment of the El Salvador entity and then being the first global platform to receive that license, that was a big accomplishment. And then this week, the launch of our second asset on the platform and one of the world's first tokenized bonds. I think those are all big things that we've done in the last 12 months or so. And then going forward, I think there seems to be a lot of demand and interest in conventional securities world around what they're calling real world assets. And our thesis for a long time was that, the technological advantages of the digital asset space and of Bitcoin, we're going to pull in a lot of these mainstream institutional investors and we'll see more participation from them. And I think increasingly, although at the moment it seems like it's mostly talk and relatively little action, I think that's becoming consensus. And then, I think more generally, that what's going on in El Salvador is also very, very exciting. And we've spent a lot of time working with, regulators and policymakers in El Salvador. And we're going to start running our, the first of our applicants through the listing committee on our end over the next couple of weeks, and then hopefully start bringing some of the first issuances to market in maybe the second half of January next year. So I think, again, the next 6 months are going to be really exciting for the security token industry.
How involved is that process of bringing your applicants through like the approval process?
Yeah, I think so. The approval process in both regimes are, basically it's that someone will reach out to us, we'll do an initial kind of screening with them to make sure that's something that we want to do, that's commercially viable, that we think people will buy, and it looks like it fits neatly into like kind of generally the areas that we want to do. Then we do document collection. The issuer will fill out a listing application. They'll open an account on Bitfinex Securities. That's where they'll upload all their corporate documents. And then we'll do various run-throughs with the listing committee. So the listing committee will have people from the technology side, from legal compliance, from business side, and then we'll all evaluate the documents that have been submitted and the proposed project and kind of do an evaluation of it. Once that passes, then it goes to the regulator for their sign-off. In El Salvador, there's an additional step where there's a certifier that has to sign off on the authenticity of all the details and documents that have been submitted. But for both regimes, that's generally kind of very high level what the process is like.
And how does that approval process stack up to like the traditional IPO process?
I think it's generally kind of the same, but the documentation requirements and the risk disclosures are kind of a little bit higher if you want to. So I mean, for us in the AIFC, if we want to have access to, we can facilitate retail investments or kind of like accredited professional investments as well. And the difference is for retail, it's a full prospectus, which really isn't that different. It's exactly the same in the AIFC as for a conventional or a tokenized issuance. The El Salvador regime is slightly more novel. They've got a defined offering document that they used called a relative information document. They've got a number of requirements that are set out in that, and then you have to go through and complete that. So I think the process is pretty similar to the conventional securities process. I think we can go through it a little bit faster. In the AIFC, we have the opportunity for some waivers and things like that for to kind of help issuers get through the process. But I think it's not that dissimilar, but it moves pretty quickly.
I wanted to ask you real quick about the role of Tether products in microfinancing and any potential synergies that may exist there.
Yeah, so we had an announcement a couple of months ago with Mikro Kapital. So Mikro Kapital is a microfinancing company that manages Alternative, which is the securitization fund that is issuing the bond. And we announced an MOU with them to do two things. The first of which was to explore opportunities for tokenized securities. Basically, they've got a long track record of issuing conventional bonds and then taking that money and going out and lending it to small and mid-sized businesses across Eastern Europe, in Asia and in Central Asia as well. And the second thing was to look at applying tether products in the microfinancing industry. And I think that's I think most people, when they think of microfinancing, they think very much of brick and mortar businesses. But, we had Vincenzo Trani, who's the president and founder of Mikro Kapital. He also joined our panel at Lugano Plan B. And he kind of made the point that increasingly the kind of businesses they're lending to are online businesses. And it's people who want to receive, the proceeds of their loan. They want to receive it really quickly because they're working on something that's online and it moves very quickly. So in that kind of situation, Tether could be really useful to their business. So they're at the point now where they're investigating what the regulations are and how they go about implementing that into their business. But it's really exciting. I think both, Bitfinex and Mikro Kapital were kind of, looking at filling some of the gaps that aren't completely, in the traditional banking system. We're coming at it from different perspectives, but we're both kind of trying to achieve very similar goals, I think, which is really interesting to see.
You guys had the honor to be the first recipient of a digital assets license in El Salvador after they passed the digital asset law. Have you guys seen like other entities come into El Salvador looking to kind of replicate what you guys have done?
Yeah, there's another, I think there's 12 DASPs in total that have been licensed and registered, and you can check those out on the SNAD website, CNAD, the National Digital Asset Commission. They've got a pretty good website that lists all the various DASPs that have received a license. So there's a couple of other people in there. I think we're probably the only one that are kind of working on these security-like products. I think everyone else is doing more kind of conventional crypto assets. But we'll have to see how that plays out over time.
As far as like launching in El Salvador, you guys mentioned that you have a pipeline that you're ready to start moving on this coming January. Are you able to kind of shed some light on what type of offerings these might be?
Sure. Yeah, it kind of runs the gamut. So we've got people looking at doing hash rate contracts. We've got a number of different kind of debt bond issuances. And we've got some companies looking to do equity kind of type structures as well. So it really runs the gamut. But yeah, we've had quite a bit of interest in the regime, and people are really keen to start, I think, moving forward with their issuances.
As far as Astana goes, you guys mentioned that you also have a pipeline there. Are they similar types of offerings as the kind that you just described here for El Salvador?
I think we tend to see the AIFC is built off of British common law. So I think for a lot of European issuers, it's just a very familiar structure. And it seems to appeal to kind of larger, more mature companies, and also people that are focused on doing accredited or professional offerings. It seems to attract them a little bit more. I really would like to do a full prospectus or retail offering out of there. And we've got a couple in the pipeline as well. So hopefully we can get one of those off in the next couple of months as well.
What is the thing you're most excited about as far as tokenized securities goes for 2024?
That's a really good question. I'm just really excited about the whole El Salvador regime because there's just such a buzz around it. And it's a place I think where we can really move the needle. So I really want to start getting some issuances done through El Salvador. And I think El Salvador could be really, just as El Salvador was the first country to adopt Bitcoin as its currency, I think, them being the first one to adopt Bitcoin-based capital markets, I think is really going to kind of kick in the door for other countries as well. And once other countries look and see that they can do this, and they've kind of, demonstrated this proof of concept, I think we're just going to have a lot more countries and jurisdictions that are going to be really excited about trying this. So I'm really looking forward to getting some assets out the door and to the market in El Salvador.
Aside from Central Asia and El Salvador, Latin America, do you see any other like friendly regulatory spots for pursuing these kind of offerings?
Yeah, we have calls all the time. So, as you know, Giles Dixon, our head of licensing, he's kind of looking at this stuff, and there's different ones popping up all the time, and we're trying to keep on top of them. I think there's going to be more over time as we demonstrate, this as a proof of concept. But it seems to be a trend, and I think, this trend within the banking industry of real world assets You have even people like Larry Fink talking about how, he sees capital markets moving in the way of tokenization. I think that's the long-term trend is very much in that direction. So over time, I think we'll see more jurisdictions starting to do this.
Have you seen interest from any other like more well-established financial centers, like say Singapore or Hong Kong or Tokyo, show interest in these tokenized security offerings and possibly like introducing regulation to make them possible?
Yeah, I think in Hong Kong in particular, in Singapore, there's been quite a bit of news. I'm slightly skeptical. The incumbents there have, they've dug pretty deep moats, and I think it's difficult to do business as, to do the kind of tokenization that we want to do, I think is probably a little bit difficult. And I haven't seen anybody in those regimes do what I would consider to be proper tokenization. So, we definitely, look forward to them to embracing this kind of opportunity. But at the moment, I'm slightly skeptical that we'll see, opportunities that we have like in the AIFC or in El Salvador in some of these more mature regimes.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you that is important for our viewers to know?
I mean, maybe the only other thing we could go through is the benefits of tokenization. I mean, we touched on that last time, but maybe we can do a quick review on that.
Yeah, let's give them a recap.
Yeah, I think the benefits of tokenization, I normally break that into kind of like three groups, right? On the trading side, on the issuer side, and then for the investors. And on the trading side, I think it's the stuff that, again, that we're used to as Bitcoin investors and Bitcoin traders is 24/7, 365 trading, global liquidity, real-time settlement. I think real-time settlement is really a big one. So most of my, all of my traditional financial markets experience was here in Taiwan. We trade 9 until 1:30. It's T+2 settlement. So, when you sell your TSMC on Friday, you don't get your cash until the following week. So if you're a hedge fund and you make your money by churning capital, that's kind of a bit of a problem. So I think real-time settlement is a real benefit, not only for hedge funds just in terms of capital efficiency, because they can take their money and then churn it again, but also maybe in risk management too, because you can take your capital off the platform and you can do something else with it. So I think that's often kind of overlooked as a major benefit of tokenization. On the issuer side, because we're able to disintermediate so many of the middlemen, it means, as we said kind of at the beginning, that we can offer our services at a much lower cost basis, which means that we can go out and access, we can offer our services to, small, mid-sized enterprises. We can offer our services to issuers kind of all around the world and in places that have kind of been overlooked by traditional capital markets. And then finally, for investors, I think technology like Blockstream's Liquid Network, it means you have a lot more control over your own assets, right? Through transfer restricted assets where you can set up these whitelists. Investors are able to self-custody their assets. You can pull them off the platform. You can send them to other exchanges for arbitrage, and even trade them peer-to-peer with whitelisted counterparties. So I think from a securities perspective, that's just really revolutionary. And then there's more exotic functionalities that I think will emerge over the next couple of quarters, things like increased granularity on voting, and increased granularity on dividend distribution. So typically dividends are paid out quarterly or semi-annually, but why don't we have them monthly or weekly or daily or just stream them? So I think all of that stuff is really exciting, and in many ways, security tokenization, it's about returning some of the control that has been eroded over the past couple decades of securities law back to investors. So I think that's a trend we're definitely excited about.
You mentioned like the types of offerings that Bitfinex Securities is focusing on,
Yep.
Being like traditional securities offerings, but do you see like tokenization of commodities as like a potential market in the future?
I think definitely, yeah. So our license in the AIFC doesn't cover that. It basically covers three things. It covers equity, debt, and funds. And then in El Salvador, you kind of have a broader remit. So we can cover things like tokenized commodities or other kind of more novel things like different structures for hash rate contracts. So yeah, that's definitely something that I think we're excited about and looking at exploring.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I think that's it. I mean, I would say go check out Alt 2611, our tokenized bond offering, 36-month bond, 10% coupon, raising in Tether. Dividend distribution will be done in Tether as well. Take a look at that, and I'd say, as always, sign up to the platform now. When El Salvador gets going, I think there'll be a rush, so beat the rush and sign up now.
When will the tokenized bond from Mikro Kapital be active?
It's active now. Yeah, you can go look at it now. You can go sign up
Okay.
now. Yeah.
Cool. Well, Jesse, thank you so much for coming on the show and letting me ask you a whole bunch of questions about tokenized securities again.
No, it's great. It's always good talking with you, Ricardo. I appreciate the opportunity.